1939 was the last year of independence for Estonia. In his Independence Day speech, President Konstantin Päts expressed the hope that Estonia's independence would remain secure. Our country has experienced another peaceful year. Even though the whole world has been agitated, even while nations around us fear the prospect of a major bloodletting, our small Estonian nation has not been disturbed and has tended to its daily work in peace, fearless in our immunity. We want to live in peace, to work in peace. We want to avoid trouble, and we want to contribute to the triumph of peace in the world.
Kaasa aidata, et terves maailmas rahu võidule pääseks.
The summer of 1939 was beautiful, promising a good harvest. People worked in the fields, but these weren't ordinary times. The smell of war was in the air. People were alarmed. Austria had disappeared from the map, and that spring, Czechoslovakia too. Germany had seized the Klaipeda region, which meant that nervousness was palpable in our area too. Estonia had no power to back its independence, and the collective security system of our states was powerless as well. In the spring of 1939, the Soviet Union and Germany began to converge. At Molotov's initiative, an additional protocol, a secret one, was appended to the non-aggression pact that they had concluded. Molotov, who was the chairman of the Council of People's Commissars and also the People's Commissar for Foreign Affairs of the Soviet Union, arrived in Berlin at the invitation of the Third Reich. The agreements provided for the division of Eastern Europe. They relegated Finland, Estonia, and Latvia to the sphere of influence of the Soviet Union, to be followed later on by Lithuania. The additional protocol was stamped top secret, but news of it leaked out almost at once. The Estonian government knew of it within 3 days. All thinking people understood the danger of the German-Russian agreement, but the fathers of the nation reassured the people and didn't inform them of the specifics of the pact.
Aga ma sellest kuulsin juba 39. aastal. Nimelt 39. aastal läksid.
I didn't know that this was the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact as such, but I had already heard of it in 1939. In 1939, the Baltic Germans began to depart for Germany, and my high school German teacher Karl Hoffmann was saying that he'd be leaving for Germany soon. Our great Führer is calling us back to Germany. As agreed between the governments of Estonia and Germany, Germans living in Estonia would be able to return to Germany. Germans with foreign passports at the resettlement station at Toompuiestee 3. The resettlement included both German nationals living in Estonia and Germans with Estonian citizenship. He said he would have gladly stayed, but added that he survived one episode of Bolshevik terror and didn't want to experience that again. The exodus of the Germans was an ominous sign. Of the 16,000 Germans resident in Estonia, almost 13,000 left the country during a 5-month period. Estonia emphasized its neutrality in the war that had broken out by now, but Molotov accused Estonia of violating neutrality and demanded that Estonia allow Soviet military bases to be established on her territory. Naval vessels with Soviet troops put out to sea, heading towards Estonia. The government gave in. On September 28th, a treaty permitting the presence of Soviet bases was signed. In accordance with a pact of mutual assistance, the Estonian Republic gave the Soviet Union the right to set up naval bases and some airports on the Estonian islands of Saaremaa and Hiiumaa and in the town of Paldiski on the basis of a lease.
Juba 3 nädalat varem baaside lepingu läbirääkimiste ajal oli NSV Liit rikkunud Eesti
3 weeks earlier, even as negotiations were underway concerning the treaty that would allow the creation of Soviet bases, the USSR had violated the integrity of Estonian waters and airspace. Now everyone realized that Estonian sovereignty had come to an end.
18. oktoobril tuli punavägi üle Eesti.
On October the 18th, the Red Army crossed the Estonian border. As early as September, the Soviet Union had threateningly assembled 600 tanks against Estonia's 30, 600 airplanes against Estonia's 60, and 160,000 troops at a time when the Estonian army consisted of 16,000 soldiers. Estonia would have been capable of mobilizing a total of 100,000 men if all able-bodied men had been called to arms. The Red Army troops were moving in excellent order. They would bring peace, a state of stability to the people of Estonia, and the friendship of the peoples of the Soviet Union. The treaty permitting the establishment of Soviet bases allowed the USSR to bring in 25,000 Red Army soldiers and airmen. The Red Fleet would be permitted to use the capital city as a temporary naval base. Marching hard as iron, the mighty army is coming. Flying the blood-red flag, the marshal leads us onward for homeland, for the party, for Stalin. When the Russian army started to move in from Kuivastu harbor, they didn't want the people to see it. As a result, a great number of Home Guard personnel were summoned to duty in Saaremaa. On the way from Kuivastu to Kuressaare, there was a member of the Home Guard posted every 100 or 200 meters, wearing an armband and a gun on his shoulder. They didn't let the people onto the road. Even so, the village boys gathered in groups. Through the lilacs, we peered to see what they looked like. There was an interesting moment when an old Soviet gas truck stopped. It had a small artillery piece behind it. 6 men were aboard right in front of us on the road. They were gravel roads back then, dusty ones. Then they jumped off this lorry, and one of them took an accordion. He had one knee on the ground and the other one up. He started to play the accordion, so these 5 soldiers danced there, and after they had amused themselves, they drove on. When the Russian army came, I was watching in the yard. They struck me as being comical. They had those funny hats on, and they stared at us. They kept marching on. There were quite a few of them. There is both a record player and books supplied for the so-called red corners. It was the old gray uniform, obviously dirty and unwashed. Even though the filthiness was awful, discipline was so strict that I don't know of any incidents related to the Russian military that was in Viljandi at that time. The Russians purchased bicycles in Estonia. The officers received their pay in Estonian crowns. They didn't know how to ride a bicycle, and they went to the place where the military unit was stationed. It used to be a fairground. Well, one of them would hold the saddle, and the other was on the bike, and that was how they learned to ride. Such great officers and majors. On June the 5th, the German invasion of France began. Moscow took advantage of the fact that the eyes of the world were on France and acted without shame in the Baltic countries. Lithuania was presented with an ultimatum, with Estonia following on June the 16th, demanding that the Red Army